I'm a former homeless person, but I'm also a physician. This idea that homeless people in general, just because they're quote homeless, doesn't mean they don't have potential. My idea is that first of all, we need to see these homeless people, not as just a homeless person, but as a person that needs our help.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hart Inspired, the show dedicated to highlighting individuals in their pursuit of authentic leadership. We peel back the layers to uncover the roadblocks we all face, explore the actions we can take, and how to persevere towards the best version of ourselves. It is my hope that you'll be inspired by their story and gain some insights to help you in your own journey.
I wish I could just die, I said to myself as my teeth chattered and my body shook with cold. Sometimes the deck of cards handed to us is filled with the same suit. The Joker, perhaps. So what do you do when everything seems gray and hopeless? Do you give up? Are your efforts all for nothing? Family dynamics look different for all of us. In some cases, the inside is very different than what others see. Does it define you as an adult? As human, there are three vital things we need to survive: food, shelter, and love. The rest is what we dream and strive for. In this episode, Dr. Christopher Smith, author of Homeless to Hopkins, will share his journey. Today, he dedicates his time and resources to raising awareness of homelessness in children and finding solutions to help them overcome adversity. Dig deep, find your strength in your faith, in your inner circle, and in yourself. Please welcome my guest today, Dr. Christopher Smith.
This series is all about resilience, but in our conversation with Dr. Christopher Smith today, we're going to touch upon imposter syndrome, adversity, you name it, it's all in there. So, Chris, you had posted something on LinkedIn where I hang out quite a bit and many others. And the tagline is the name of your book, Homeless to Hopkins. And it really drew me in. I needed to know more. And so connecting with you was the beginning of our journey of meeting one another. Then I picked up the book and I just was thinking from the first and 2 pages, this is like a movie that you've just drawn me in. So I want to turn it over to you and let's start with where you are today and kind of give the audience the journey backwards, if you will. You are a doctor. What kind of doctor are you?
So I'm a medical doctor. I have an MD. My specialty is diagnostic radiology. So what that means is I look at imaging such as MRIs, CT scans, CAT scans, ultrasounds. If somebody goes to the hospital and has like an MRI of their brain done, I look at the images, interpret it, and then I tell the ordering physician what is happening on the images.
Your journey to becoming a doctor was no easy feat. But let's work our way backwards, if we will. So you've been a doctor doing what you're doing today for how many years now?
So I graduated medical school in 2001, and
Okay.
then I did my residency and fellowship over a 6-year period, finished that in 2007, and then I was faculty at Johns Hopkins for several years, and now I'm in private practice here in Florida. And my group's in Pennsylvania, but I live in Florida now. Because of my specialty, I can work remotely, especially since COVID allowed that more to happen.
Isn't that amazing that COVID, even for doctors like yourself, allowed for remote work? So that's pretty impressive. So you've been a doctor for a number of years now. And what made you decide radiology?
Number one, it's technology driven. It's very much on the cutting edge of medicine. We do a lot of interesting things, a lot of interesting developments with imaging, and now actually artificial intelligence and things like that. The other thing is very cerebral. You have to know a lot about all the specialties, a lot of diseases, about every single specialty in medicine. You have to learn all this pathology and disease. And so I like that nature of learning everything all about the different diseases. A lot of people don't realize that radiologists do. We actually make a lot of diagnoses that people have is through imaging. And that's what I really enjoyed was kind of the aspect of learning as much as I could about the pathology of the human body.
When I was reading your book, that really kind of makes sense because you have a thirst for knowledge or learning, I should say, like no other, especially with your journey. So let's go back to the time John Hopkins, obviously a well-known, established, high-profile medical institution. Tell us how that was when you first found out that you were going to be working within that organization or that institution, I should say.
When you finish medical school, you had to do something called the residency match, or you apply for the match. And you apply at different institutions based on their difficulty of getting in, and your specialty you do. So my specialty is radiology. It's actually a very competitive specialty in medicine to get into. And when I applied at Johns Hopkins, it was literally less than 1% chance of me getting into Hopkins, meaning there were 700 to 800 people applying for a total of 6 positions.
Wow.
So literally less than 1% chance of me getting into an institution like that. And so I applied just as a dream shot, just shooting for the stars. I figured I may as well go for the stars, right? Everybody knows Hopkins, at least everybody, and Hopkins is very well known, and their reputation is well deserved. It's a great place to practice medicine. And so I applied and I interviewed there with a man named Stanley Siegelman. He was the program director, and he saw something in me. I don't know, exactly sure, but he saw something in me and he accepted me to the program. And it was amazing. The people at Hopkins are fabulous. They're very hardworking, incredibly knowledgeable people, kind people. And my class was interesting because everybody in my class had all pretty much gone to Ivy League schools, except for me. My journey was not like any of theirs to get at Hopkins.
That's pretty interesting. So let's take it back now and go from your undergrad and what that was like with going into medical school. What was that like?
So medical school is the same way, very competitive to get into. When I applied to medical school, I applied at a wide range of institutions. And my first interview was at the University of Utah, the School of Medicine in Salt Lake City. And I interviewed there, and one interviewer, a woman named Dr. Judge, she was the dean of admissions. And I interviewed with her, and she said, okay, if you get a letter in 2 weeks, that means that we rejected you because we like to interview everybody before we do acceptance. And she said, very, very rarely we do an early admission. So I interviewed, I thought, it went great. Then I go home, 2 weeks later, a letter shows up in my mailbox, and I'm like, oh no, oh man, this is it. I got rejected that quickly. That's pretty bad, right? Yeah. But I opened it up and I almost dropped to the floor because I actually got an early admission to the University of Utah. And for us, it was a blessing, my wife and I, because we were quite poor. We're struggling students, and we had to pay for all these interviews to travel across the country and stuff. So once I got that acceptance, I didn't have to worry about any of my other interviews. I just canceled, and it was a blessing for us in that way. The chance of getting into medical school, again, you have to be competitive. It's not it's fairly competitive getting into medical school. And so yeah. I felt I was just very blessed with that opportunity.
Now, you mentioned the opportunity and blessed, and, we all think of the optimistics of those, but your journey was definitely not blessed and filled with great opportunities all the time, although there had to be something in you, an inner fire, an inner light that kept you going. So let's talk now. Let's go back a little bit and share with the audience a little bit about your journey. We don't want to give away everything because we want them to read the book like I did, because I think it should be a movie. But let's talk about your early childhood and what were some of the challenges you faced that just for anyone else may have decided a different path for them.
So yeah, growing up, my life was not a Leave It to Beaver scenario, your typical sitcom scenario. So it was more very dysfunctional sitcom. So my family growing up, I was one of 11 children, the 6th of 11 children. My family struggled financially from my earliest memories about 3 or 4 till I was out of the house. And very difficult struggles, meaning we were evicted many, many times. I lost count of the actual number of times, at least 20 to 24, a couple dozen times basically. And usually we were evicted, because of non-payment. Well, that's non-payment of rent. And so when sometimes we would keep our stuff, sometimes we'd lose some of our stuff, when the landlord locked it out. And usually it was with very short notice. And accompanied with that is our housing was often substandard. So I would sleep in areas that weren't necessarily designed to be slept in, such as a garage or a partially finished carport or things like that, even as a kid. So I remember one time when I was 12, it was so cold at night. We're in Utah, so Utah gets cold at night. It gets below freezing in the winter. One night, my brother's fish tank actually froze because it was so cold at night, and we were sleeping out in that cold weather. Variety of other things. We often lived without electricity and gas for months at a time, not just weeks, but months. And we'd do things like cook our food over the fire or warm our water over the fire, bath water. Also study by candlelight, electricity. It sounds like we lived like in the 1800s, I know, but like Abraham Lincoln time, right? So but that's
And
the
far
life.
from it.
Exactly. So yeah, so I would study by candlelight, and there was a huge that was pretty much most of my life until I was age 16. This cycle of repeated evictions, living without electricity, and kind of the mental stress. And as a teenager, going through that was pretty heavy. So there were some times I really struggled with that part of it as well, because teenagers are hard enough, but not being homeless and things like that added on top of it.
You had friends in school. You had played sports, right? A little bit of sports,
Yes.
correct? And yet you did all these things as a normal teenager or a normal child. How difficult was it to keep that front? Because, you probably put up a facade like, oh, this is normal. You didn't want people to know what was happening at home. How difficult was that for you?
It was exhausting, actually. It was
Yeah.
exhausting because I always had this front of like this model student, athlete. Yeah, when I was younger, I played baseball and basketball. High
Yeah.
school, I did wrestling and football. And I was in the student government my senior year. I took AP classes. I was an honor student. But at the same time, I was sleeping in a truck my senior year of high school. That was my car. My bedroom was the car. And so it was very difficult because I'd come from this place that most people don't ever go to, and then go to school, and then try to maintain this facade of normalcy as a teenager, sleeping in a car, trying to work through that and not reveal to my friends and just school officials what was going on. And I always carried me with this fear with me. I always had this fear and this anxiety with me that somebody would find us out, because I was afraid they would take away my siblings, from our parents and put us into foster homes, which is kind of a fear that most kids
Yeah.
going through that have. That fear was exhausting, and part of it, what it meant is I basically compartmentalized a lot of my emotions as a kid. I just kind of locked them up in a box and just focused on intellectual school and didn't deal with my emotions at all. Just kind of locked them away, which is not necessarily healthy. It's a survival strategy, but it's not necessarily healthiest strategy.
Yeah. So school became like your haven, your safe place. Yeah.
Exactly. School was my safe space.
Yeah.
School was my safe from the earliest memories of kindergarten all through high school. School was my safe space. I loved school because it didn't go anywhere. It was warm. The lights were on. The food was there, as a kid.
Yeah, yeah. When you were in the high school years, let's say, you obviously had to become more and more aware of what was the dynamic of your parents, what was really going on. I mean, did you know at an early age, or was it really come to light in high school like this is not good?
Yeah, I think early on as a kid, you don't really understand a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
like when you're younger than 10. But yes, as I got older, maybe 12, 14, I started to realize, our lives are not really normal. This is not a good life. This is not normal compared to everybody else. And especially when I started working, my first job was actually like 8 or 9 years old, picking fruit in an orchard, and we gave the money to my parents. I was literally, and then I started working at a restaurant when I was 15 and 16. And once I started doing that, I started to realize, about money a lot more and working. And so the thing that I always wondered is, why didn't my parents ever kind of reach out and work, or my father work and maintain a regular job, so we didn't have these difficulties? And I don't know the answer to that still today. So I don't know. I never figured out why he didn't. Because he was a brilliant man, but I don't know. He didn't function normally in society. I don't understand. But
That's interesting. Do you know much about your father's parents that maybe, sometimes they say things kind of repeat themselves and patterns just keep going from generation to generation?
yeah, my father's parents, actually, my grandparents were farmers in Idaho. They're very down to earth, stalwart people, lived in the same house for like 50, 60 years.
Okay.
And they had I think they had 7 or 8 children, and all their children went to college and turned out okay and had normal jobs and normal lives. And then my father didn't. My father, I think, started out, but then he was like a dreamer. He always had this unrealistic dream of trying to become the next billionaire inventor and
Yeah.
things. But he was never able to do that. And so I think his dream was always this esoteric idea of becoming super wealthy, hitting a home run and become super wealthy. But rather than just going to work and doing the daily grind, the daily work, day in, day out. And that was just I don't understand, honestly. I kind of,
Yeah. Yeah.
to this point, I still don't.
It seemed like in the book that your father, even though he maybe had that victim, it's happening to me, as opposed to taking responsibility, was still a really big cheerleader of you.
He was, yeah. So he always encouraged us in sports and encouraged us to try to do
Yeah,
things. And that I think actually was very important in my life because I grew up with the ability of not being afraid to try to do
yeah,
something. And
yeah,
yeah, so they very much had the victim mentality, especially my mother, my father as well, because they did some things obviously which weren't very good. That's one thing my father did is he coached us in sports and stuff like that when I was young, and that encouraged us to try to achieve something in our
yeah.
lives.
One part of the book, you talk about how you are trying to separate so that you're not dragged into their drama, if you will. But it seems like no matter how much you tried to pull away, the love for your parents, no matter how bad life was so big in your heart.
Yeah, it's very true. And that was one of the hardest things is trying to create that boundary, but at
Yeah,
the same time still love my parents as my parents. And that's the thing about my book. I didn't write it, and you can sense it when you read it. I wasn't writing it to say condemn them or anything. I was just writing it as things happen. The reality
yeah,
of it was. And
yeah.
because I really did want to help my parents. And actually after my father died, I ended up buying a condo that my mother lived in actually for 10 years so she'd have somewhere to stay. So I still kind of still
Yeah,
try to help
yeah.
them.
She's still there. Is she still with us?
No, she's still, yeah, she's still alive, but she's no longer in that condo. She moved somewhere else.
And now you're not the only success story from this family dynamic in your family. You have quite a few siblings that are all with the MD prior or after their names. Is that correct?
So yeah, we have in my family out of the 11 siblings, one brother died when I was young, and
Yeah.
so 10 of us lived adulthood, and six of us actually earned doctorate degrees. We have two MDs, two dentists, and two PhDs. So different doctorate degrees, but all doctorate degrees.
And do you live near each other?
We kind of spread a little bit out, but most of them live back west still.
That must be an interesting Thanksgiving conversation with all of you being so smart in the medical
Yeah, that
field.
it can be. It can be interesting. What's interesting too is we never really talked about our lives growing up, and by me writing this book, some of my older siblings have actually talked with me about it. They said it's very therapeutic to actually talk about this and to work through these emotions and
Yeah.
understand. You know, even it's been a long time, we still haven't done it. And so this has actually been very helpful for that way.
Oh, so for even for all of them, that's really great because I was wondering whether they would felt like, you aired our laundry and it wasn't
A
for you
couple,
to do. Yeah.
a couple of them felt that way, but most of them actually felt very relieved to actually talk about the ghost, the skeleton in the closet, you know what I mean, that we
Yeah.
never talked about for 30, 40 years, you know?
Yeah. So tell us about the love of your life, your lovely wife, who in the book, I wanted to give her a hug. You met her and you were completely smitten. So tell us about that love story.
I was. So my wife is the best person I know. She really is. She's the kindest, most humble person I know. So before I met my wife, I always felt kind of incomplete. I felt kind of, fractured. But once I met my wife and we were married, I felt like I could have somebody love me unconditionally for who I am and just accept me. And I felt complete. And we've had a lot, we've had some difficult struggles. We go through the book, some things we went through. And it's, some of those challenges brought us together. I mean, because we only could rely on each other. And that's part of the story too, is it's not just about me going to Hopkins, it's about me finding myself and finding joy in life. And that's
Yeah.
probably the biggest part of it is finding happiness.
I definitely got that because it almost seemed like when I was reading the book and saw that, okay, he's found the love of his life, you're going to get married. Yes, poor medical students, they live whatever. And then her health issues that had come up, and then the children that you've adopted, and you now have a pretty large family yourself. I thought, oh no, here we go again. But it all works out. But it was almost as if the story was going to repeat itself, not to the same degree, but that there was going to be hiccups and challenges and not smooth leave it to beaver story.
Exactly. And that's kind of why I included that part of it, because once you reach a certain point, it doesn't mean life gets easier. It means that you're able to deal with those challenges better. You can work through them better,
Yeah.
you know?
So now you've written this book, which we will have in the show notes. I highly recommend everyone pick up a copy of it. But absolutely therapeutic for you. You have a mission and a message based on your story. So tell us a little bit about that, what you're doing with some of your speaking engagements and things like that.
So I'm with my book. I also just wrote a children's book with it as well that just came out to help children. So I'll get into that. So what I do now is I actually speak at like fundraisers for homelessness, and kind of to bring light to the idea of, I'm a former homeless person, but I'm also a physician. This idea that homeless people in general, just because they're quote homeless, doesn't mean they don't have potential. They can do amazing things. And I kind of talk about like Oprah Winfrey, who, and Chris Pratt, Dr. Chris Pratt, obviously movie star, he was homeless briefly as well. Steve Harvey, all these amazing people overcame this homelessness. And so what I do now is I share these fundraising groups to raise money for homelessness to help families and children in homelessness. I just recently spoke at the Palm Beach County Coalition here in Florida, and it was the mayor's ball, and we had like 350, 400 people there, and I shared my story, and it was dead quiet when I was talking. And people came up afterwards and said, thank you so much for sharing. I had some struggle as a kid growing up, and this really brought back some of those memories, but it makes me also want to help other people. And that's my goal, is to encourage people to help others that are in that situation, to see a lot of times homelessness is an invisible problem. We don't like to look at homelessness. When we walk past a homeless person on the street, most people turn their eyes the other way because they don't want to, because it makes them uncomfortable to see someone like that, especially if there's a kid, there's families there. My idea is that, first of all, we need to see these homeless people as people, not as just a homeless person, but as a person that needs our help. And what can we do to help them? That's kind of my mission now. And especially my children's book I wrote for the kids. So like because every day in the US, there are about 150,000 homeless children and families every single day in the US, school districts across the country. And it's an invisible problem. And these kids struggle and they don't know what to do. And most of them end up dropping out of school by the time they're in high school. And so my book, I wrote it for them to inspire them. Life's rough right now, but it can get better. I can keep working and keep doing these things and ask for help.
Wow, that's so powerful. It is true. When you pass a homeless person on the street, and I'm in the New York area, and when you go to Manhattan and you see them on the street, it is uncomfortable to look. You don't know whether they could be dangerous or what their situation was. Why were they homeless? With so many layoffs, people could be homeless in 60 days. You just don't know. You don't know the story. So I commend you for bringing attention to that and bringing awareness to it. So aside from being a physician and a speaker, bringing awareness to this, and an author, what are some of your other big dreams that you have for you? And you're a father and a husband. I forgot.
Yes. I have 5 daughters now. We adopted 2 and we have 3 biological and married. So some of the other things I actually do is I actually have a real estate company. I actually started, and we bought houses, and I fix them up and rent them as affordable as we can for people to have housing to live in.
Oh, that's awesome.
And one of my dreams someday is to have like an area where you could just buy a bunch of land and build a bunch of small houses for people to live in. And then you basically they would pay rent towards owning the house. That eventually once they paid enough, then they would own the house themselves and, try to get people away from homeless. So that's one of my dreams. So
that's an amazing dream. Well, Chris, this has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and your mission. I think it's pretty incredible. We will make sure that we have all of your information on the show notes. Your website is homelesstohopkins.com. Is that correct?
Yep, homelesstohopkins.com.
The name of the book is Homeless to Hopkins. It is on Amazon and I'm sure other places too.
It's on Barnes & Noble. There's also an Audible version as well if people like Audible. So
yeah, I just downloaded it on my Kindle. It was great. And we'll have your contact information if anyone wants to reach out to you regarding a speaking engagement or just to, maybe hear more about some of your other outreaches that you're doing. I think it's really great. But again, thank you so much for being a part of the show today. I hope for those who are listening, if you know somebody who may be struggling, this story should definitely be told to inspire that this too shall pass. There's definitely a light that can flip on and you can have greater opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been fabulous.
Yes, thank you. I will look forward to seeing what other big things you are doing. All the best to you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you again for listening. We'll be back soon with a brand new episode of the Hart Inspired podcast. Until then, I'm your host, Michelle Delgado. I welcome you to support the show by rating us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. To learn more about Hart Metrics Consulting, book a strategy call by visiting the website at hartmetrics.com.